Something just happened in Formula One that nobody's talking about yet. But when the 2026 season arrives, everyone will be looking back at this exact moment and asking why nobody saw it coming. Ferrari discovered something that might fundamentally change how we understand engine regulations, fuel chemistry, and thermal management in professional motorsport. And the scariest part? The FAI might not even have the authority to stop it once they realize what's happening. We're not talking about a simple performance upgrade here. This isn't about finding an extra tenth of a second through aerodynamic tweaks or suspension geometry. This is something far more technical, far more controversial, and potentially far more impactful than anything we've seen in Formula One during the last decade. This is about redefining what an engine can do when you combine three things: new regulations, sustainable fuel mandates, and creative thermal management architecture. Let me back up and explain why this matters so much right now. Formula One has a history of pushing boundaries. Teams find loopholes. Engineers design at the absolute limit of what's legal. Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes dominated for years using DRS systems that other teams didn't understand. Red Bull revolutionized the sport with aerodynamic principles that seemed impossible. McLaren built cars with designs that seemed to violate every conventional racing principle. That's the sport's DNA. Push the boundaries until someone tells you to stop. Sometimes you get championships. Sometimes you get penalized. Either way, you're remembered as either a genius or a cautionary tale. But the 2026 regulations represent something different entirely. This isn't a mid-season regulation change that affects all teams equally. This is a complete technological reset. Every single thing teams have built, perfected, and optimized over the last decade becomes partially irrelevant. The power unit architecture itself is being completely redesigned. The fuel is changing, the energy systems are changing, the performance distribution between combustion engines and hybrid systems is shifting dramatically, and most importantly, nobody has a proven baseline to work from anymore. That's when innovation happens. That's when teams that think differently gain massive advantages. And that's exactly where Ferrari appears to have positioned themselves, with something that's generating serious discussion in technical circles. Let's start with what officially happens in 2026. Formula One is going green. Or at least that's the narrative being sold to the world. By 2026, every single car on the grid will run on 100% sustainable fuel. This isn't a hybrid approach where you're blending conventional fuel with sustainable alternatives. We're talking about complete biofuels and e-fuels, advanced sustainable fuel technology that's engineered from household waste, agricultural biomass, and other renewable sources. The environmental commitment is real. But here's what's fascinating. Nobody fully anticipated the technical consequences of making this mandate. Shell has been developing Ferrari's specific fuel blend for months. This isn't generic sustainable fuel. This is custom chemistry engineered specifically for Ferrari's engines, Ferrari's fuel injection systems, and Ferrari's power unit architecture. The fuel is designed to deliver specific energy density, specific combustion characteristics, and specific thermal properties. That last part, thermal properties, is where everything gets interesting. See, sustainable fuels don't burn exactly like conventional racing fuel. The chemical composition is fundamentally different. When you're sourcing energy from biomass instead of refined petroleum, you're dealing with different molecular structures, different combustion temperatures, different expansion rates during the power stroke. The thermal signature of this fuel is unique. And Ferrari's engineering team recognized something that most other teams apparently missed. These unique thermal properties could be exploited through creative cooling system design. Now, let's talk about the compression ratio situation because this is where the technical controversy really begins. The 2026 engine regulations have already specified that internal combustion engines will have a maximum compression ratio of 16:1. This is a significant reduction from the current 18:1. That single change is massive in terms of thermodynamic efficiency. Compression ratio determines how much you squeeze the fuel-air mixture before igniting it. Higher compression means more efficient combustion, more power extraction, higher operating temperatures. Lower compression means the opposite. When you mandate a lower compression ratio, you're forcing teams to accept lower peak power output from the traditional combustion engine. The FAI made this regulation change specifically because they wanted to reduce the power output of the combustion engine while increasing the importance of the hybrid electric system. The 2026 power units will have significantly more powerful MGU-K systems. That's the battery component that harvests energy from braking. We're talking about doubling the electrical contribution compared to current regulations. So the overall car will be fast, sometimes faster than current cars, but the traditional engine is becoming less dominant than it's been in over a decade. Here's the problem though. The regulations specify static compression ratio. That's the measurement you get when the engine is sitting still, when you physically measure the volume of the cylinder at maximum compression versus minimum compression. It's a fixed number, it doesn't change. But dynamic compression ratio, the effective compression that occurs during actual engine operation, that can theoretically vary depending on how you manage temperature, heat transfer, and thermal expansion. And this distinction matters because it opens an absolutely massive loophole. Think about it from first principles. If you have a combustion chamber with specific dimensions, that chamber has a specific volume at any given moment. But thermal expansion changes that. Metal expands when it heats up. Gas expands when it heats up. If you can control the temperature profile of your combustion chamber with extraordinary precision through specialized cooling architecture, you can theoretically change the dynamic compression ratio during operation without touching the physical static compression ratio that the FAI measures. According to reports from technical analysts and racing insiders familiar with Ferrari's 2026 testing program, Ferrari has been exploring exactly this strategy. They've developed what some sources are referring to as a specialized thermal management system. And yes, some people are calling it a cooling port configuration, though the exact technical specifications remain proprietary. And unclear to outsiders, this system allegedly manages engine temperature through unconventional cooling paths designed specifically for the thermal characteristics of Shell's custom biofuel blend. Here's where it gets really interesting. The FIA regulations don't actually specify how cooling systems should work. There's no rule defining where radiators must be located. There's no regulation stating that cooling ducts must follow specific paths. There's no technical directive specifying what cooling medium must be used or how cooling architecture must be designed. This omission exists because nobody anticipated that teams would completely rethink cooling architecture around new fuel types. The regulations were written assuming conventional fuel with conventional thermal management. But Ferrari is working with custom biofuel, so conventional assumptions don't apply. Mercedes has reportedly been exploring similar thermal management strategies, though according to technical observers, their approach focuses more on exploiting ambient air temperature versus engine operating temperature. There's speculation that Mercedes tested configurations during pre-season testing sessions, particularly during early February tests when ambient temperatures were lower. Lewis Hamilton ran similar setup configurations during Mercedes testing. Both drivers were reportedly testing different cooling duct configurations, unusual radiator placements, and experimental thermal management systems. But when the Hungarian Grand Prix arrived in July 2026, those experimental configurations completely disappeared from the practice sessions. Ferrari ran conventional thermal management. Mercedes did the same. The risk calculation apparently didn't justify continued testing during a race weekend where the entire world would be scrutinizing technical details. But here's what that tells us. Both teams clearly believed there was something legitimate to explore here. They wouldn't test unconventional systems during official testing sessions if they thought the systems were obviously illegal. The very fact that Ferrari was willing to invest engineering resources into developing and testing these approaches indicates they believe there's plausible technical interpretation supporting their legality. Let's dig deeper into why sustainable fuels create this opportunity in the first place. When you mandate a complete fuel change, you're forcing teams to work with chemistry they don't fully understand yet. Sustainable fuels from biomass sources have different energy density than conventional fuel. They have different combustion temperature profiles. They burn at different rates. They release energy on different timescales during the combustion cycle.
These differences are enormous from an engineering perspective. Shell's custom biofuel blend for Ferrari is specifically engineered to work with Ferrari's fuel injection systems, Ferrari's combustion chamber geometry, and Ferrari's specific engine architecture. The fuel is optimized for Ferrari engines, not generic Formula One engines. That creates an advantage before you even get to the cooling system question. Ferrari has custom fuel. Other teams might be running fuel that's designed for more generic combustion parameters. That's a significant advantage in itself. But then you add specialized cooling system architecture designed specifically for this fuel's thermal properties, and you're potentially looking at an advantage that's difficult for other teams to replicate, even if they wanted to. They don't have access to Ferrari's custom fuel formulation. They don't have Ferrari's engineering experience working with this specific fuel. They would have to independently develop their own approaches, and that takes time. The 2026 regulations are going to create a technology divide that we haven't seen since the introduction of hybrid power units back in 2014. That took several years before other teams caught up to Mercedes' advantage. If Ferrari has identified a legitimate approach using sustainable fuel properties and thermal management, they could potentially enjoy years of performance advantage before other teams fully understand and replicate the technology. But here's the massive caveat. This all depends on whether the FIA considers it legal. And the FIA's silence on cooling system specifications is deafening. There have been no technical directives clarifying what cooling systems are and aren't permitted. There have been no official statements about whether thermal management strategies designed around sustainable fuel properties violate compression ratio regulations. The FIA is watching. They're monitoring Ferrari's development direction. They're probably already analyzing data from testing sessions, but they haven't officially drawn any lines yet. That silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is Ferrari's advantage right now. If the FIA decides the system is legal before issuing guidance against it, Ferrari could run the entire 2026 season with an advantage that becomes permanently embedded in their car design and operational strategy. If the FIA decides it's illegal and issues technical directives banning it, Ferrari would have to redesign key components before the 2026 season even starts. That would be catastrophic to their development timeline. This is Formula One politics at its most sophisticated. You push boundaries with plausible deniability. You develop systems that can be interpreted as legal under current regulations, even if they're in gray areas. You test them quietly during official testing sessions. If someone complains, you argue they're legitimate. If nobody complains before racing starts, you run them. By the time the FIA issues clarifying technical directives, you've already gained performance advantages and championship points. It's happened before, it'll probably happen again. This is how the sport works at the highest level. Now let's talk about the broader implications. If Ferrari's approach actually works, if these thermal management systems genuinely provide meaningful performance advantages through dynamic compression ratio manipulation, we're talking about a technology that fundamentally redefines how future engines will be designed. Every team will want to adopt similar strategies. The competitive landscape will shift. Car designs will become increasingly focused on thermal management architecture rather than traditional aerodynamic optimization. That's actually good for the sport in some ways. Thermal management innovation is
Genuine engineering, it's not cosmetic. It doesn't just make cars look different, it makes them fundamentally work differently. If Ferrari has discovered a way to extract more performance through better understanding of fuel chemistry and thermal dynamics, that's legitimate innovation that should be rewarded, assuming it's legal. Conversely, if the FIA determines that these systems exploit loopholes in compression ratio regulations, they'll issue technical directives banning them immediately. Those directives would apply to all teams from a specified date forward. Ferrari would potentially face penalties for running illegal systems during testing or racing before the directive was issued. This has happened before with various technologies. The FIA bans something, teams that ran it face consequences. The sport moves on. The real question isn't whether Ferrari's approach works. All evidence suggests it does work, at least to some degree. The real question is whether the FIA will allow it to continue once they officially determine what's happening, and that decision probably hasn't been made yet. Let's consider the timeline here. The 2026 season is less than 2 years away. Testing programs are underway.
Car development is accelerating rapidly. Ferrari is apparently confident enough to test these systems during official sessions, but they're also cautious enough to stop testing them during race weekends. That's strategic restraint. That's a team that knows they're in a gray area and doesn't want to push too hard before guidance is clarified. Mercedes' parallel exploration of thermal management strategies suggests that multiple teams recognize this opportunity. It's not just Ferrari. But Ferrari might be ahead in development. Ferrari might have more experience working with custom sustainable fuel. Ferrari might have better understanding of how thermal management interacts with biofuel combustion. If Ferrari's ahead, that's a massive advantage for the next several years. Consider what this means for competition. McLaren, Red Bull, Aston Martin, Alpine, and other teams are all trying to develop competitive 2026 power units. They're all starting from different baselines. They're all making different engineering assumptions. But if Ferrari has identified a legitimate performance advantage that other teams don't fully understand yet, Ferrari could dominate 2026 and 2027 before everyone else catches up. That's exactly how championships are won, by seeing something that everyone else misses. The 2026 season was supposed to be a fresh start for everyone. The 2026 regulations were supposed to reset competitive balance and give different teams opportunities to challenge Mercedes' dominance. But if Ferrari's thermal management approach is as significant as technical observers suggest, Ferrari might become the dominant force before the season even starts. That would be ironic, given that the new regulations were designed to prevent single-team dominance. It's also worth noting that this entire situation exists because of the environmental regulations. The sustainable fuel mandate created the conditions for Ferrari to discover this advantage. Without the requirement to use 100% sustainable fuel, teams would continue using conventional fuel and conventional thermal management. Nobody would be exploring specialized cooling systems designed around biomass combustion characteristics. The environmental regulation, designed to make Formula One more sustainable, accidentally opened the door to competitive advantage that might persist for years. That's the beautiful complexity of regulation. You can't predict all the consequences. You can't close every loophole. You can write rules as carefully as possible, but clever engineers will find angles you never considered. That's why Formula One is fascinating. That's why the sport generates innovation. That's why teams win championships, because they see opportunities that regulation creators didn't anticipate. Now, what happens next? The FIA is almost certainly aware of Ferrari's testing. They probably have data from official testing sessions. They probably have telemetry information, video footage, and technical reports analyzing Ferrari's configurations. The FIA's technical team is sophisticated enough to recognize when teams are experimenting with unconventional approaches. The FIA has several options. They could issue technical directives clarifying that thermal management systems designed to manipulate dynamic compression ratios violate compression ratio regulations, and those directives would apply to all teams going forward. They could allow it to continue and let the sport organically move toward more sophisticated thermal management strategies across the grid. They could issue guidance that permits specific thermal management approaches while banning others. They could wait and see what happens during the 2026 season before issuing clarification. Political considerations matter here too. Ferrari is one of the sport's most iconic teams. The FIA doesn't want to appear as though they're favoring Ferrari by allowing controversial systems, but they also don't want to appear as though they're unfairly penalizing Ferrari for innovation. The balance is delicate. The politics are complex. What's absolutely certain is that the 2026 season will be the most technically diverse Formula One has been in decades. Teams will arrive at preseason testing with completely different car designs, different power unit approaches, and different engineering philosophies. The grid will be genuinely diverse in technical approach, and that diversity will create unpredictable competition. That's actually healthy for the sport. Predictability kills interest. Competitive uncertainty creates drama. If everyone had the same technical approach, races would be determined purely by driver skill and engine power. But when different teams pursue different technical directions, unexpected competitive dynamics emerge. The team that understood the regulations best wins. The team that innovated most effectively wins. The team that took the biggest calculated risk wins. Ferrari is taking a calculated risk right now. They're developing thermal management systems that exist in regulatory gray areas. They're betting that these systems are legal, or at least legal enough that the FIA won't ban them before the 2026 season starts. They're investing engineering resources into a technology that might disappear overnight if the FIA issues clarifying directives. That's the kind of risk-taking that wins championships. That's also the kind of risk-taking that occasionally results in penalties, point deductions, and technical humiliation. There's no guarantee this works out in Ferrari's favor. There's only certainty that they're pursuing something unusual, something controversial, and something that might define the next era of Formula One. The sustainable fuel mandate was supposed to simplify the sport, to standardize fuel across all teams, to let competition focus on other performance factors. Instead, it's created an entirely new frontier for competitive innovation. Sustainable fuel properties are creating unexpected opportunities. Thermal management strategies are becoming as important as aerodynamic design. The regulations meant to standardize the sport are actually driving technical diversity. That's Formula One, though. That's always been Formula One. You write regulations with good intentions. Teams find creative ways to interpret those regulations. Innovation happens. Competition intensifies. Sometimes the innovations get banned. Sometimes they become the foundation for the next generation of technical development. Either way, the sport moves forward through this cycle of regulation, innovation, and technical evolution. Ferrari has placed their bet. They've tested their systems. They've gathered data. They've made their choice about how to approach 2026. Whether that choice proves to be brilliant innovation or catastrophic misjudgment will become clear starting in 2026, and nobody outside Ferrari's engineering team actually knows whether the FIA will allow it to continue. That's the real tension here. That's what makes this story genuinely compelling. We're watching this unfold in real time. We're witnessing a moment that will probably define Ferrari's competitive position for the next several years, and we have no idea how it's going to resolve. The 2026 season is coming. It's not distant anymore. It's arriving whether every team is ready or not. Ferrari appears to have made their move. Mercedes is apparently exploring similar approaches. Other teams are probably scrambling to understand what's happening and whether they need to completely rethink their technical strategies. The real story of 2026 might not be about sustainable fuels or environmental commitment at all. It might be about thermal management innovation. It might be about how Ferrari understood fuel chemistry better than anyone else. It might be about how one team's creative interpretation of technical regulations created a competitive advantage that defined an entire era of Formula One. Or it might be about how the FIA issued technical directives that made all of this irrelevant, and we'll look back wondering what could have been if Ferrari's innovations had been allowed to continue. Either way, something genuinely important is happening right now, and once the 2026 season starts, we'll finally know whether Ferrari's bet was genius or catastrophic misjudgment. The wait continues. The FIA remains silent. Ferrari keeps developing, and everyone else is either trying to catch up or hoping the whole thing gets banned before it matters.